On the evening of July 7th, 2026, 21-year-old Arianna Bailey Jones walked out of her apartment expecting nothing more than a first date with a man she had met through social media. She had spent time talking with him online. Their conversations had been friendly enough that meeting in person seemed like the natural next step. Like millions of people every year, Arianna believed she was taking a chance on getting to know someone new. Instead, investigators say that decision became the final chapter of her life. Just days later, detectives would uncover what they believed to be her body, buried in a shallow grave in a remote Arizona desert. The man she had gone out with, 24-year-old Domonic Rodolico, would soon face a charge of first-degree premeditated murder. But when investigators first questioned him, Rodolico insisted he wasn't responsible. According to his account, everything had gone wrong because of two mysterious strangers. He claimed that while he and Arianna were alone in the desert, two unknown men suddenly appeared, attacked them both, and forced him to flee for his life, leaving Arianna behind. At first glance, it sounded like the kind of random tragedy that occasionally happens in isolated places. But detectives would soon discover that almost every part of his story raised more questions than answers. Before investigators could understand what happened in the desert, they first needed to understand who Arianna Jones was. Friends and family described the 21-year-old as someone who stayed closely connected with the people she loved. She regularly checked in with relatives, answered messages, and maintained daily contact with those closest to her. Her sudden silence was so unusual that it immediately alarmed her family. According to investigators, they reported her missing after several days passed without hearing from her. For Arianna, disappearing without telling anyone simply wasn't normal. Detectives quickly began reconstructing the last known hours of her life. Digital evidence showed that she had arranged to meet Domonic Rodolico after the two connected through social media. Investigators believe this was their very first in-person meeting. Surveillance cameras later confirmed that the couple traveled together to a local movie theater. Nothing about the footage appeared unusual. Two young adults walking into a theater, buying concessions, watching a movie, leaving together. If someone had watched the security footage that night, they would have seen what appeared to be an ordinary first date. No visible argument, no signs of fear. Nothing suggesting that within hours, one of them would vanish forever. After leaving the theater, investigators say the pair drove north toward a remote desert area outside the Phoenix metropolitan region. The location was far removed from neighborhoods, businesses, and heavy traffic. For detectives, that decision would later become one of the most important parts of the investigation. Why drive to such an isolated place after a movie? Was it spontaneous? Or had one person already chosen that destination long before the date began? At that point, investigators simply didn't know. While detectives searched for Arianna, her family continued hoping she would somehow return home. Instead, officers obtained a search warrant for her apartment. Inside, they found something that immediately changed the direction of the investigation. Arianna's cell phone was still inside the apartment. For most missing person cases involving young adults, a cell phone usually travels with the person. Leaving it behind dramatically reduced the possibility that she had voluntarily disappeared. But that wasn't the only disturbing discovery. Investigators also found her dog locked inside a crate. The animal had apparently been left alone for days without food and was surrounded by its own waste. To experienced detectives, that scene suggested something serious had interrupted Arianna's normal routine. People planning to leave town rarely abandon both their phone and their pet. The apartment showed no indication that she had packed belongings or prepared to disappear. Everything pointed towards someone who expected to come back home. As detectives expanded the timeline, technology began filling in the missing pieces. Security cameras, license plate readers, cell phone location data, business surveillance systems. Each new source of information added another step to the couple's journey. Investigators were able to trace Arianna from her apartment to the movie theater, then from the theater toward the remote desert. Every mile they reconstructed narrowed the window of uncertainty. Meanwhile, detectives interviewed Domonic Rodolico. He acknowledged spending time with Arianna that evening. He admitted they had gone to the movies. He admitted driving into the desert. But then his story took a dramatic turn. According to Rodolico, two unidentified attackers suddenly appeared in the isolated area. He claimed both he and Arianna were assaulted. He said he managed to escape. And according to his version of events, Arianna was left behind with the attackers. It was a frightening story. If true, it would mean a pair of unknown criminals had committed the murder. But investigators immediately noticed something that didn't fit. If Rodolico had barely escaped with his life, why didn't he call 911? Why didn't he report the attack? Why didn't he lead officers back to the location? Why didn't he ask anyone to help rescue Arianna? Instead, detectives say no emergency call was ever made. No report was filed. No effort appeared to have been made to alert authorities. That silence would become one of the first major cracks in his account. As investigators continued gathering evidence, they realized this case would not depend on a confession. It would depend on facts. Every surveillance camera, every cell phone signal, every physical clue, every inconsistency. Somewhere among those pieces was the truth about what really happened after that first date ended. And before long, detectives would discover evidence hidden beneath the Arizona desert that would transform a missing person investigation into a homicide case. When detectives began interviewing Domonic Rodolico, they weren't looking for a perfect confession. They were looking for consistency. In almost every homicide investigation, investigators know that truthful accounts tend to remain stable over time. A person who genuinely experiences a traumatic event may remember additional details later, but the central facts usually stay the same. False stories often do the opposite. As new evidence appears, the story begins to shift. That is exactly what detectives say happened in this case. Rodolico admitted that he had spent the evening with Arianna Jones. He acknowledged that they had gone to the movies together before driving into a remote desert area north of Phoenix. Then he offered an explanation for her disappearance. According to him, two unknown men suddenly appeared in the desert. He claimed they attacked both him and Arianna without warning. He said he somehow escaped the assault while Arianna remained behind. At first, detectives carefully documented every detail. But as the interviews continued, something unusual began happening. His version of events kept changing. Investigators later explained that parts of the attack became more dramatic during one interview, then less dramatic during another. Certain details appeared, others disappeared. Small changes eventually became major contradictions. Detectives weren't simply comparing his words with his previous interviews. They were comparing them against physical evidence. And the evidence wasn't supporting his claims. One of the biggest questions investigators asked was remarkably simple. If someone had just survived a violent attack in the middle of the desert, what would that person do next? Most people would immediately call 911. They would seek medical attention. They would report the crime. They would tell officers where another victim had been left behind. According to investigators, Rodolico did none of those things. There was no emergency call, no report to law enforcement, no attempt to guide officers to the supposed crime scene. Instead, detectives say he simply went on with his life. Even more troubling, investigators said Rodolico reportedly told them he believed Arianna was probably no longer alive after the alleged attack. If that was truly what he believed, detectives wondered why he never contacted anyone who might have been able to save her. That question became increasingly difficult to answer. Then investigators uncovered another piece of evidence. Surveillance cameras captured Rodolico after Arianna disappeared. According to police, the footage showed him cleaning out the back seat of his vehicle. By itself, cleaning a car is not a crime. People clean their vehicles every day. But timing matters. When someone cleans part of a vehicle immediately after becoming the last known person seen with the missing woman, investigators naturally begin asking why. What was being removed? Why the back seat? Was it routine maintenance? Or was someone trying to eliminate evidence before police became involved? Those questions would remain part of the investigation. Detectives also noticed injuries on Rodolico. He reportedly had wounds that appeared consistent with stab injuries. He claimed those wounds came from the mysterious attackers during the assault in the desert. Again, investigators didn't dismiss the claim immediately. Instead, they examined it alongside every other piece of evidence they had collected. Could the injuries match his story? Or were they the result of something entirely different? As forensic specialists continued processing evidence, detectives widened their search beyond interviews. Modern homicide investigations rarely depend on witness statements alone. Digital evidence often tells its own story. Cell phone records, vehicle movements, business surveillance, traffic cameras, location history. Together, these sources can create a timeline far more reliable than memory. And in this case, detectives had access to all of them. Investigators began reconstructing nearly every movement made by Arianna and Rodolico during the evening. Each new discovery either supported or contradicted his account. One clue stood out almost immediately. At the remote desert location, investigators recovered a movie theater concession cup. At first glance, it seemed insignificant. A disposable drink cup could have belonged to anyone, but detectives already knew the couple had gone to a movie theater before driving into the desert. That small piece of evidence helped confirm they had traveled directly from the theater to the isolated location where investigators now believed the crime had occurred. It connected two separate parts of the timeline into one continuous sequence. For investigators, seemingly ordinary objects often become powerful evidence. A receipt, a bottle, a discarded wrapper, a cup. Each one helps answer a simple question. Who was here? In this case, the answer appeared increasingly clear. As detectives continued reviewing digital records, they uncovered another unexpected detail. According to investigators, Rodolico had traveled to that same secluded desert area multiple times before Arianna disappeared. Police have not concluded whether the murder was planned in advance. Investigators have emphasized that they are still working to determine whether those earlier visits were connected to the crime or entirely unrelated. But the repeated trips immediately raised additional questions. If the area held no personal significance, why return there several times? Was he familiar with the location simply because he liked visiting remote desert roads? Or had he already identified it as a place where few people would notice suspicious activity? At this stage, detectives avoided speculation. Instead, they focused on evidence: every interview, every surveillance video, every digital record, every forensic examination. Slowly, a picture began emerging. Not because one dramatic piece of evidence solved the case, but because dozens of small facts were beginning to point in the same direction. Then investigators made the discovery that changed everything. Hidden beneath the desert sand, they located what they believed to be Arianna Jones. The missing person investigation was now officially a homicide investigation, and the evidence collected over the previous 4 days would soon give detectives what they believed was enough probable cause to arrest the man who had been with her on the last night she was seen alive. For decades, homicide investigations depended largely on eyewitnesses, confessions, and physical evidence left behind at a crime scene. Today, detectives have another powerful witness: technology. In the investigation into Arianna Bailey Jones's disappearance, police say digital evidence became one of the most important tools they had. Instead of relying solely on what Domonic Rodolico told them, investigators allowed electronic records, surveillance footage, and forensic evidence to reconstruct the final hours of Arianna's life. And unlike people, digital evidence doesn't forget. The Glendale Police Department immediately began gathering every available piece of electronic information connected to the case. Investigators reviewed surveillance cameras, analyzed cell phone location data, examined vehicle movements, and used resources from the department's real-time crime center to rebuild an accurate timeline. Piece by piece, the investigation became less dependent on theories and more dependent on facts. The first major step was confirming the couple's movements before Arianna disappeared. Surveillance footage placed both Arianna and Rodolico at her apartment before they left together. Additional cameras captured them arriving at a movie theater. Investigators confirmed that the pair spent time inside before leaving together later that evening. Everything matched the timeline Rodolico had initially described. But after the movie, technology continued following them. Cell phone location records and other digital evidence showed the pair traveling north toward an isolated desert area outside the Phoenix metropolitan region. This wasn't simply a general direction. Investigators were able to narrow their movements with remarkable precision. Every cell phone communicates with nearby towers. Modern devices also generate location information through GPS, wireless networks, and application data. Combined with surveillance footage, detectives were able to reconstruct a detailed route from the theater to the remote desert. The timeline was becoming increasingly complete. Then investigators focused on what happened after Arianna vanished. Unlike Rodolico's changing interviews, electronic records remained consistent. Police examined his vehicle movements after the date ended. Security cameras later captured something detectives considered highly significant. According to investigators, Rodolico was seen cleaning the backseat of his vehicle shortly after Arianna disappeared. The footage immediately attracted investigators' attention. Cleaning a vehicle is not illegal. But when someone becomes the last known person seen with a missing woman and then appears to clean part of the vehicle before she is reported missing, detectives naturally begin asking whether evidence was being removed. That question became even more important as forensic specialists continued processing every available clue. One seemingly ordinary object recovered from the desert would soon become another critical piece of the investigation. Among the evidence collected near the burial site was a movie theater concession cup. At first glance, it looked insignificant. Thousands of disposable drink cups are discarded every day. But detectives already knew that Arianna and Rodolico had gone to a movie theater shortly before driving into the desert. The cup helped connect the burial site directly to the couple's final known activities. It confirmed that the isolated location wasn't unrelated to their evening. Instead, investigators believed it was where the date had ended. The evidence continued to grow. Detectives also analyzed Rodolico's previous travel patterns. According to investigators, digital records showed that he had visited the same remote desert location several times before Arianna disappeared. Police have not publicly concluded that those earlier trips prove planning. Investigators have been careful to say they are still determining whether the homicide was premeditated or whether events escalated unexpectedly after the couple arrived. Even so, the repeated visits raised obvious investigative questions. Why that specific location? Why return there multiple times before bringing Arianna there? Was it coincidence? Or was the location already familiar because it offered privacy and isolation? Those questions remain part of the ongoing investigation. Technology also played another important role. It helped detectives separate verified facts from unsupported claims. Throughout the interviews, Rodolico insisted that two unidentified attackers had appeared and assaulted both him and Arianna. Investigators searched for evidence that might support that version of events. They looked for digital traces, witnesses, surveillance footage, any indication that additional people had been present. According to police, the evidence instead continued pointing back to Rodolico himself. As detectives compared his statements with the growing collection of digital records, they found fewer and fewer reasons to believe his explanation. Every inconsistency made the electronic evidence even more valuable. Meanwhile, investigators expanded their search of the remote desert area. Eventually, they located what appeared to be a shallow grave. Inside were human remains, along with clothing and personal items consistent with Arianna Jones. Although the Maricopa County medical examiner continued working to determine the official cause and manner of death, detectives believed they had found the missing woman they had spent days searching for. Another identifying feature strengthened that conclusion. Investigators noted a distinctive tattoo on Arianna's forearm that matched the remains recovered from the burial site. Combined with clothing and additional physical evidence, detectives became confident they had located Arianna. In only 4 days, what began as a missing person investigation had developed into a homicide case, supported by surveillance footage, digital records, forensic evidence, and detailed investigative work. The Glendale Police Department later credited its detectives, the Special Investigations Unit, the Real-Time Crime Center, and assistance from the U.S. Marshals Task Force for helping solve the case so quickly. Rather than depending on one dramatic breakthrough, the investigation succeeded because dozens of independent pieces of evidence fit together like a puzzle. Each camera, each cell phone record, each physical clue, each timeline reconstruction. None of them alone solved the case. Together, they created a narrative that investigators believed accurately described Arianna's final movements. By the end of the 4th day, detectives believed they had established probable cause to make an arrest. The man who had claimed unknown attackers were responsible was now the person facing a first-degree premeditated murder charge. But even after the arrest, one important question remained unanswered. Why did a first date between two people who had only recently met online and with one of them buried in a remote Arizona desert? That question would become the focus of prosecutors as the case moved into the courtroom, where investigators would begin presenting the evidence they believe tells the true story of Arianna Bailey Jones' final hours. As investigators completed the final pieces of the timeline, they reached a conclusion they believed was supported by both physical and digital evidence. The disappearance of Arianna Bailey Jones was no longer being treated as a missing person case. It was now a homicide investigation. Based on the evidence collected during those critical first 4 days, Glendale police arrested 24-year-old Domonic Rodolico and recommended a charge of first-degree premeditated murder. For Arianna's family, the arrest brought two very different emotions. They finally knew what had happened to the young woman they had desperately hoped would return home. But the answer came with unimaginable loss. Police publicly expressed their condolences, saying investigators had hoped for a very different outcome when the search first began. Instead of bringing Arianna home safely, detectives were forced to notify her loved ones that she had been found in a shallow grave in the Arizona desert. Although the Maricopa County medical examiner continued working to determine the official cause and manner of death, investigators believed the evidence they had collected established probable cause that Rodolico was responsible for her death. One question immediately captured public attention. Was this murder planned? Investigators have been careful not to make claims that cannot yet be supported in court. During a news conference, detectives acknowledged that Rodolico had visited the remote desert area several times before the date with Arianna. At the same time, they emphasized that investigators had not yet determined whether those visits proved advanced planning or were unrelated to the crime. That distinction matters. A criminal investigation is built on evidence, not assumptions. Every conclusion must ultimately withstand scrutiny in court. As prosecutors prepare their case, they will likely focus on the evidence they believe demonstrates intent, opportunity, and actions taken after the crime. The defense, meanwhile, will have the opportunity to challenge every part of that evidence. That process is fundamental to the American justice system. Every defendant is presumed innocent unless proven guilty beyond a reasonable doubt in a court of law. Still, investigators say several aspects of Rodolico's behavior became central to the case. He was the last known person seen with Arianna. His explanation changed repeatedly during interviews. He never called 911 after claiming both he and Arianna had been attacked. He never contacted police to report the alleged assault. Surveillance cameras reportedly captured him cleaning the back seat of his vehicle after Arianna disappeared. Digital evidence placed him with Arianna throughout the evening. Investigators also linked the remote burial site to the couple's final movements through surveillance footage, cell phone data, and physical evidence recovered from the scene. Rather than depending on a single dramatic clue, detectives built what prosecutors often describe as a cumulative case. Each individual fact might appear ordinary by itself. Taken together, investigators believe they told one consistent story. Police also revealed that Rodolico was already on supervised probation at the time of his arrest. Court records show that less than a year earlier, he had pleaded guilty in an unrelated case involving criminal impersonation connected to thefts at 2 Quick Trip convenience stores in the Phoenix area. According to those records, he had posed as an employee and stolen money from cash registers before eventually receiving supervised probation. While those previous offenses are separate from the homicide investigation, they became part of the public record after his arrest. Following his initial court appearance, a judge set Rodolico's bond at $2 million cash. He remains in custody as the criminal case moves through the legal system. For investigators, however, the most important accomplishment came long before the arrest. They solved the case quickly enough to preserve critical evidence while memories were still fresh and digital records remained available. Modern homicide investigations are increasingly shaped by technology. Every phone leaves location data. Every traffic camera records passing vehicles. Businesses routinely store surveillance footage. Digital devices quietly create timelines that investigators can later reconstruct. In many cases, technology cannot explain why a crime happened, but it can often reveal where people went, when they arrived, and whether their stories match reality. This investigation illustrates that shift with remarkable clarity. The case did not turn on a confession. It did not depend on an eyewitness seeing the crime itself. Instead, detectives assembled hundreds of small details. A surveillance camera outside an apartment, another camera at a movie theater, cell phone location records, vehicle movements, a concession cup left in the desert, a freshly cleaned back seat, repeated visits to an isolated location, a story that changed with each interview. Each clue became another piece of a much larger puzzle. For Arianna's family, no amount of evidence can erase what happened. A young woman who left home expecting an ordinary evening never returned. Her family lost a daughter. A child lost his mother. Friends lost someone they believed had an entire future ahead of her. Cases involving online relationships have become increasingly common over the past decade. Millions of people safely meet partners through social media and dating platforms every year. Most first dates end with nothing more than a conversation and the possibility of a second meeting. But this investigation serves as a reminder that meeting someone for the first time always carries unknown risks. Law enforcement agencies frequently encourage people to meet in public places, share their plans with family or friends, keep their phones accessible, and avoid traveling to isolated locations with someone they have only recently met. Those precautions cannot prevent every tragedy, but they can sometimes create opportunities for help before a situation becomes dangerous. As this case moves through the court system, prosecutors will continue presenting the evidence they believe proves Rodolico intentionally killed Arianna Bailey Jones. The defense will challenge that evidence, and a jury will ultimately decide whether the prosecution has met its burden of proof. Until then, one heartbreaking reality remains unchanged. What began as a hopeful first date ended with a missing person investigation, a shallow desert grave, and a family forever searching for answers that may never fully explain why Arianna Bailey Jones never came home. Thank you for watching. If you found this case informative, consider subscribing for more evidence-based true crime documentaries, where we examine not only what happened, but how investigators uncovered the truth. And as always, let us know your thoughts. Do you believe it was Rodolico's changing story that first raised investigators' suspicions? Or was modern digital technology the decisive factor that solved this case?